Hey everybody, this is Jeffrey Lyles. You're listening to Lyles Movie Files. On today's show, I'm talking to Leigh Whannell. He's the director of Upgrade, and it's this really cool concept film about a quadriplegic who wants to get payback for his wife's murder. Whannell is probably somebody you may not know, but you've seen his work if you're in any way a fan of horror and thriller films. He's the co-creator of Saw and Insidious, and he also directed Insidious Chapter 3. Really cool guy. I had a lot of fun just talking with him and picking his brain about the process of Upgrade, what other film genres he's thinking about going into next, and just the challenges of making a sci-fi film in 2018 on a limited budget, and what kind of things he did to make it feel acceptable and look good to modern audiences. Hope you enjoyed the interview. I had a blast doing it. I'll talk to you on the back end.
You know, I was really curious to see that you're stepping away from doing the horror films and going more to sci-fi. What inspired you to go this direction, and why now?
I think I always wanted to make something outside of the horror genre. I mean, I love the sci-fi genre. A lot of my favorite films are sci-fi films that I grew up with, like The Terminator, The Thing, which I guess you could say The Thing is kind of a horror film too, right. But RoboCop, Videodrome. I mean, the more these films stack up, the more it's no accident that you love a certain type of movie, and I think that there was a sci-fi story kind of sitting in my subconscious waiting to get out, so I'm glad I had the chance to purge that story and make something in another genre, you know?
It was kind of interesting with this one. There is, I guess, sort of that horror of man and machine element to it. So can you speak a little bit about that and that fear of machines taking over? It's dated back to like the Terminator.
Exactly. I mean, it's definitely something that's been talked about before in stories and films. This fight between AI and human beings. What I was actually more interested in is the merging of humans and computers, the singularity where the tech is actually in our bodies, and that to me is really interesting because that is something that human beings will willingly do. People will willingly insert the tech into their bodies, and what I liked about that was it differentiated it from a robot movie. You know, we've seen robot movies before, synthetic humans. This to me was more about humans who were wanting to upgrade themselves, to use tech to make themselves smarter or faster or stronger, or you know, to use tech in the way that we upgrade our phones or we upgrade our computers. Like, imagine being able to do that to your own body. And so that to me was the interesting part of it, and I almost don't fall into the negative or the positive camp on that front. Like, I think there's going to be some great things about integrating tech into our bodies, especially when it comes to the medical industry. Right. You know, if we're able to install a chip inside us that regulates our blood or cures cancer, then that's going to be great. But then we also have to look at the other side, where we start thinking about how much control are we going to give to these computers. Yeah,
because I thought about that. I was like, this is kind of neat because it's that next step of evolution. We're always trying to upgrade, and we've done everything we can outside, so the next step clearly has to be inside.
I think you're right, yeah.
And it's just like this, you know, it's one of those deals where, it's sci-fi, but it doesn't seem like that's so far off, like, you know, spaceships and hyperdrives.
Right, yeah. No, I wanted to do something that felt very around the corner, like 10, 15 years from now. Yeah. I didn't want to make something that felt so far in the future. I didn't want it to feel like a fantasy, you know. I wanted it to feel like reality, like it could happen.
And then from the film, it wasn't one of those overly CGI deals, and I know you'd mentioned before that was something you were intentionally trying to do, to not go so heavy with that. Can you elaborate a little bit more about why that was important for this one?
Well, I think aesthetically I just really like practical effects. I think that the human eye can tell whether something's really in front of them and whether it's CG. And you know, look at these Star Wars movies they're doing now. They're actually moving back towards practical because that's what the audience loves. The audience wants to see it. You know, CG is a great tool to have in a filmmaker's, you know, kit, but it should only be one element of it. It should be something that you use as a paintbrush to kind of augment what you have. To me, there's nothing like practical, like having it right there. It's good for the crew, it's good for the actors. You want to actually do it for real. And so that was important to me. But then on the other hand, I think just practically, the practical effects were good because we didn't have the money to do a huge CGI extravaganza. We had to contain this film and try to keep it, under the budget. So practical effects and kind of shrinking it down like that was a way to keep it low budget.
What were some of the shortcuts you used to stay within budget? Because I know the norm is to always go over and ask for more money. How did you keep within that budget, and what were some of the tricks you did?
Well, it wasn't one thing. There was a few different things we did. Like, for instance, I'll give you one example. One story is that we built that car of the future, and then, if you remember, in the opening scene, the car flipped over when he and his wife were in it. So originally that was scripted as we see the car flip and land, and then the producers came to me and they said, we don't have the money to crash that car, because we need that car later in the car chase, and we can't flip it. And so I was thinking about it, and it kind of forced me into this box, and necessity being the mother of invention, I kind of thought, well, why don't we just shoot the whole car crash from inside the car? So what we ended up doing is we had the car drive up to a ramp and start the ascent, but it didn't actually flip over, and then we put the actors in a rig and we just flip it around. And when you watch the movie back, I don't think the audience misses anything. They still get the feeling of what it would be like to crash in this car. So I guess that's but one example of how we managed to squash the movie into this lower budget.
Right. I know one of the things with horror movies are that the directors don't always want to show everything. And did you take any of those lessons you used from Insidious? Like, I don't have to lead the audience through every step of the way. I can allow them to fill in those gaps.
Absolutely. No, that's a good observation. I think that is something you learn in horror, is how to show restraint, how to hide. And that was definitely something I wanted to do with this, is that you didn't have to see the city every 5 minutes. You could just see it once.
Right.
And then that's enough. Now we know where we are, and that would allow us to operate. So I definitely think there was a few techniques I learned from horror that were very instructive in terms of keeping it low budget.
I want to get back to Upgrade, but so now you've done sci-fi. You've already crossed off horror. What's next on the horizon for you? What's the next genre you want to explore?
There's so many films. I wrote a kids film years ago that I would love to make. It's like a kids fantasy movie, like Labyrinth or something like that. I would love to make something like that. That actually does require a little bit of money, so that's probably further down the road. But for me, it's really about the story. Like right now, I'm writing something that's a horror film. It's not like any other horror film I've done before, but I've gone back to that genre, not because of the genre, but because I like the story.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really about whatever the best story is.
And I know people have always been like, the Saw movies, Insidious films don't feel like traditional horror movies because they're a little bit different. And I think Upgrade is one of those sci-fi films like Ex Machina, where it's like, okay, this isn't the...
It feels a little bit different. Oh, that's cool, man. That's definitely what I was going for. Like, I want people to walk out of this movie and feel like they've seen something a bit new, something a little bit unique.
Right.
And also, hopefully, they've had a good time.
Yeah. If there's one thing you kind of want them to think, or as they're leaving out, like, what is the one thing you want them to have stuck in their heads that days later they go back and like, oh, I see what he was talking about here, what he wanted to do with this?
I guess I want them to think about, without spoiling anything, I want them to think about the ending of the movie and how this guy ended up being the very embodiment of the thing he hated. He was a guy who hates technology becomes technology, and so I'd love it if that ending stayed with the audiences and they kept thinking about it.
Right. And there was something also that I thought was really interesting with this was you don't always find the protagonist of films a paralyzed, paraplegic.
Right.
Paraplegic. Yeah. That's the word.
Yeah.
And so what kind of led you down that path? Was it, let me make a slight change to the normal revenge flick and put him in this position, or was there
I think it actually started with that. That was the first thing. The first seed of this film that popped into my head was the image of a quadriplegic whose body was being controlled by a chip, by a computer chip. And it kind of opened up this Pandora's box of possibilities, because I started thinking about what if they were fighting for control of the of this one body.
Right.
And so it really started with that element of the paralysis,
right.
and then the rest of the story built around it. And that was the thing that I felt was really unique. Like you said, I hadn't seen too many films where a quadriplegic was the central character and ended up having this condition cured. So that is the sort of idea that sustained me through everything, through all the years of rewriting and making the film. I just kept coming back to that.
How long was this process for you? Like, what made it stick with you? Like, I got to get back to this. I got to do this eventually.
I just had so much passion for the idea. Originally, when I wrote it, I didn't write it for myself to direct. I wrote it for someone else, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. And then after I directed Insidious 3, I was really, chomping at the bit to make another film, and this script was still lying around. It hadn't been shot yet. It was actually attached to another director. And so I called him up and said, can I have the script back? And he was nice enough to say yes. And so it was really just my passion for that story and that take on AI that I wanted to. I loved the idea that these guys had a relationship, that they could talk to each other and bicker and banter, and I really liked that. So that kept me going.
Are you familiar with any like the Marvel and DC superheroes? It's like they have a few like that, like Captain Marvel and Rick Jones, where they're in control, and Bruce Banner and the Hulk, and Firestorm, where it's like two brains in one body.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is kind of neat, because this is a sci-fi take on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of all those things, and I guess in the tradition of storytelling, it's kind of a very it's kind of a classic storytelling thing, isn't it? To have someone in your head, whether it's a voice in your head or someone pushing you to do something you don't want to do. So as you said, I wanted to put the sci-fi spin on that and have this computer talking him through these decisions. And in the end, him watching himself do things that he didn't really want to do.
Right. It was kind of neat, because I was getting that Knight Rider twist too, where that guy.
Yeah.
He's got his super intelligence.
It's like Kit, except it's in here.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like if they did that, that would probably be the modern take.
I know. This is I'll take the job of directing Knight Rider.
Right.
Why not? Of modernising it.
Now you've written, you've been in front of the camera, you've been behind the camera. What's your favorite? Or do you have one?
I think directing's my favourite, because you've got your finger in so many pies. Like you in a way you are part of the acting, because you're working with the actors so much and then crafting their performance. You're part of the visual language of the film. You're part of the sound design. So you sort of you have your fingerprints across every aspect of the production, and I like that. So if someone had a gun to my head and said you've got to pick one, I'd probably go with directing. But I love writing too, because writing is like, it's the one part of filmmaking where you're just starting from scratch. You're the god of this universe. It's a blank page, and then you make a world out of it.
You're right. I saw something really fascinating, that you were actually a film critic, or you.
Yeah.
So what is that like? Because I know a lot of us are just sitting around and just, oh, this is terrible, this is great. What is it like coming from that background, and then like, okay, so do you take the criticisms or praise more seriously, because it's like, I was in your shoes and I know what that's like, or is it like, No,
I definitely take criticism. I read film reviews, and I'm a big fan of it, so I definitely take it to heart. Like, a great review feels good and a bad review feels bad. I try not to read the bad reviews. I might read the first sentence and then I'll squint at it. Like, I don't want to torture myself too much, but I definitely take it to heart. The thing with filmmaking is it's so personal. Like, you put so much work into it that it's hard to ignore what the world gives back to you. Once you give them your work, I can't shut it out.
Right.
I know other people are really good at just blocking it out, but I can't do that. I like listening to the feedback, because I'm a fan of reading reviews myself. I use film reviews to determine what movies to see. I base 98% of my film going decisions on reviews.
Right.
So it is important to me. But having done it myself, I think the one thing is I think if I was to review movies today, I'd probably be a lot easier on them, because I've seen how hard it is, like what a miracle it is to make anything good at all. And, you know, one thing I remember from that time is that it's much more fun to give a bad review than a good one, because you can be, you know, when you're giving a bad review, you can really have some fun.
You just tee off.
Yeah, just tee off, and, you know, that's where you can you know, try and be funny. But now that I've seen behind the Iron Curtain, I realise just how hard it is to make a film. So it's almost a miracle that any film gets made at all, let alone a good one.
Right.
You know, so that has probably changed. It's just my my leniency and my understanding of movies. You know.
Do they help inform you when you're putting your films together? Like, yeah, I remember this review and they said this, and I was about to walk.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny. A lot of filmmakers I've noticed, they try to pretend that they can ignore the critics, but I feel like reviews do influence your filmmaking. You'll read something and just as you said, you'll go into the next film and think, I can't do that next time, or you kind of adjust because the feedback that comes back at you, it's like writing an essay for college or whatever. You know, your teacher or your professor gives you these notes. Only a fool would completely ignore them. It's like you incorporate these thoughts into your voice. And so I definitely do. I definitely try to adjust, you know, based on what I'm hearing from the world. And these days, not just from critics, but from people on Twitter, you know. Now everybody's a critic. Everybody has a forum. You know, it's not just film critics anymore. It's every single person out there. So I think it's good to take the measure of the zeitgeist and sort of figure out where you sit. Where do I sit in the ladder? You know.
So what have you been hearing? What's like your reaction to all the feedback you've gotten so far from Upgrade?
Mostly great.
Yeah.
Like, we won the audience award at South by Southwest, which was really awesome, and I've read some really great reviews, like probably the best ones of my career, like for this film. I've read some really glowing reviews, and it's a good feeling. You know, I've seen a couple of negative ones too, and you're like, okay, but I feel really good about it. Like, this movie was such a gamble, because not only is it an original movie, you know, it's not a horror movie, and it's trying to be bigger than it actually is. So there's a risk there of being called a fraud. There's a risk of people saying, this movie wants to be X, but really it's, you know, Y. It's not. It's not what it wants to be. Nice effort, but you didn't make it. So when I see people embrace certain elements of the film, it's really uplifting for me, because I'm like, wow, that was something that we were just trying.
Yeah.
We had no idea how this Steadicam technique was going to turn out, or so I love it. You know, I'm definitely absorbing it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably fun to step out on that different path and then have people receive it just as well as some of the other work.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's funny because with the marketing material, we've got to go from the director.
Yes, exactly.
And the next time you'll be like, hey, from the director.
Every new movie you do changes the perception of you. You know, it's really up to you to control the perception, because if I go out and make a romantic comedy and it's not terrible, then suddenly people will say, now he's the romantic comedy guy or whatever. So to a certain degree, you control the perception of yourself.
What do you think the perception of you is right now?
Probably in the wider world, people either don't know me or they think of me as the horror guy, the Saw guy. And I know that Saw and Insidious, they're not the most critically acclaimed horror films out there. I think the original Saw and the original Insidious were, but there were so many sequels that sometimes that can dilute the goodwill. So I think like the perception might be like, he's that horror sequel guy. I take that as a challenge, basically, to say, okay, great, like let's see if I can get out some more original films and change change that perception, you know?
I'm looking forward to your romantic comedy.
Many people will die. It'll be a very gory romantic comedy. But I'll do it. If I came up with a story for a romantic comedy that I couldn't stop thinking about, I wouldn't be afraid to pursue it. In other words, I wouldn't put it aside just because I thought, well, that's not really what people know me as. Right. I would always follow the story.
Yeah.
You know?
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I know you're running low on time.
Thanks for chatting to me.
Much.
I appreciate it,
yeah,
man.
Great.
Okay, everybody, that was Leigh Whannell. Upgrade comes to theaters June 1st. If you were paying attention, or if you were on LylesMovieFiles.com, you got to see it early on May 16th. Right now, I've got a big giveaway for Solo, a Star Wars story, and there's still time to go catch the screening, so check it out. That's it for me. Once again, thank you to Leigh Whannell. Really enjoyed that interview, getting a chance to talk with him. A lot of fun. Check out the movie. Let me know what you think. Once again, Upgrade comes out June 1st, and that's it for this special episode. This episode of Lyles Movie Files has been filed.